Good evening. This is Keisha Rogers, and it is July 7th. Good to be back with you all. I hope you had a great 4th of July Independence Day weekend. And I'm back with Michael Steger. We're going to be discussing some of the developments that happened over this past weekend. On 4th of July, you had the signing by President Trump of the bill passed through the Senate and onto the House of his big, beautiful bill. And we'll get to that in just a moment, along with other breaking developments. What I wanted to do is just take one moment here to just pay tribute to the loss of lives and to remember those people who have tragically died in Kerr County in Texas. And I don't know the exact numbers. Last I heard, it was 95 people, something like 30 children, and the tolls just continue to go up. President Trump has issued a major disaster order for help in those areas. And I think it is very important for anyone who was putting out there that this was caused by President Trump. This needs to stop. And saying that he took away the ability for the weather service to do their jobs is not true at all. And there was a very strong statement that was issued by the press secretary today on this matter. But more importantly, I think what we're seeing in terms of the need for acting on the needed infrastructure and what President Trump is doing, what he's put forth with this big, beautiful bill, although all the implications of it are not fully realized yet. But I think I just want to say, extremely important that we, as President Trump has said, and as his press secretary said, it's going to do everything to stand behind these families and the victims, and also people who have lost everything, have lost their children, have lost their loved ones, and to be there for them for everything that they need. And I mean, this hits very much home with me. As people know, over 8 years ago with Hurricane Harvey, I lost family members in Harvey, and I've seen it here. I'm in Tennessee now with the devastating losses here. And I lost my parents there. But this is not something to play with. This is not something to have some political blame game on. This is extremely devastating. But we have to make sure that we're vigilant and that we're doing everything in our power to help support the infrastructure and the economic policies that are needed to rebuild our country and to support these families. So with that, I want to turn it over to Michael, because what we're going to be discussing is that very question. You have a lot of debate going on right now with so-called libertarians, free traders, all kinds of things like that want to be against what our American system and President Trump recognizes as we're ready to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the foundation of our nation. The economic principles in which this nation was founded on are to put productivity and the advancement of the nation and the people and the workers first over any of these insane free trade policies. So the idea of the pro-growth, MAGA being pro-growth versus the libertarian agenda, which unfortunately some people who are great minds have gotten themselves wrapped into, who should be part of this pro-growth agenda. This has to be debated and really addressed. So with that, let me go ahead and turn it over to Michael so we can continue with this discussion.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Happy Independence Day. It's certainly been an intense, almost amazing six months, almost 6 months now. We are 2 weeks short of Trump's second term. And as we mentioned in the email tonight, and of course, for all of you who are joining us from some of our YouTube videos and signing up and becoming members, welcome to these Monday night discussions. We look forward to hearing your questions and thoughts. It's been really an intense process, but I think, as I mentioned in the email that was sent out earlier today, part of this is kind of having to take a step back, which we often do here, to say, what are we actually involved in? Because part of the psychological operations, part of the intended effect of propaganda, part of the intended effect of a lot of the way the media covers, distracts through covering different stories, like there weren't enough budget cuts on the weather service led to the disaster of the flooding. Completely absurd and preposterous. But it's meant to shape the environment people are in, to take people out of an environment that has a long-term sense, or what we oftentimes, call the long vision, where there's a certain stability, things seem to be moving in the right direction, and people start to think a little bit longer out in terms of what are we actually engaged in, what are we involved in. And the intention of these stories, the intention of the kind of concerted effort from one story to the next is to restrict people into the immediate here and now. And you get caught up thinking about politics and the political nature of our country as if it's a football game or a basketball game. And it's really about who wins or loses, who's punishing who. It doesn't become about the country. And that's really the question here, because what are we involved in? Why are we in these discussions? Why do you take the time out to participate? Why have, Keisha, myself, and us here at Promethean Action, Promethean PAC, why do we dedicate our lives to this political fight? Because in essence, we are building something. We are creating something that has potentially an eternal value. There's nothing that has to eliminate at least the very ideas of that are the foundation of our country that we celebrated this weekend. And in some sense, of course, there may be a finite time span on the sun. But in terms of the future of mankind on Earth, which is certainly still billions of years, there's nothing that says the United States has to go out of existence. It was formed as a concept of a nation, and that we can continue to participate in that. And, for many people, there was a Gallup poll this last week, and it showed that within the Democrats, and in general, well, not in general, say with independent voters, the pride in the United States has fallen to what Gallup says 53%, which is an all-time low. It was the first time it dipped below 80% was, I think, in 2005, after, of course, the disastrous Iraq War invasion. It's now dropped below 60 to 53%. Now, with Republicans, it's over 90. But with Democrats, it's only 36%. 36% of registered Democrats. And a lot of those independents were formerly Democrats, and they've just increasingly left the Democratic Party and identify as independent. It's 36%. I mean, 2/3 of the Democratic Party. Now, of course, this has a political nature to it. But even when Joe Biden was in office, 85% of Republicans still took pride in the country. It's not like you drop the country because you don't like political leadership. Keisha earlier shared a post, an article on Axios that said, out of talking to 12 different Democratic congressmen, 9 of them reported that they've got constituents who are calling for increasing levels of violence, that if getting arrested at an ICE facility isn't enough, maybe they should be willing to get shot, and that we've got to drop any respect for the institutions, any respect for law and order, any respect for the Constitution. They've whipped up, the Democrats, the NGOs, the various cultural propaganda efforts out of Britain, the whole coup against Trump, much of the Democratic Party operation today is controlled by British London private equity firms. which control not just the party, but all of the organizations that are Planned Parenthood operations and environmental groups that are a part of the get out the vote process, are controlled by this private equity firm in London. They are instilling by intention a willingness to kind of participate in anything that is destructive, as long as it's done by the wrong person. Is, you know, whatever. Well, I mean, to destroy whatever Trump is doing. Let's just put it. They've been molded and shaped and programmed to destroy anything Trump is attempting to do. Trump wants to shut the border, open the border. If Trump wants to make sure women use women's bathrooms and men use men's, then we've got to unleash a transgender kind of jihad on the country. If Trump wants to talk to Putin, we've got to unleash a world war from Ukraine. So, you know, there's this tendency, but that tendency is to destroy the country. It's to destroy the civilization. It's to destroy any institutions, any principles, any bedrock. For what? I mean, you have to, and that's partly why they can't bring the temperature down. Why these constant efforts deployed largely from a corporate kind of media controlled center, but orchestrated and funded and deployed by globalist forces, much of it out of London, including the intelligence operations like we saw in Trump's first term and that are ongoing, like this entire libertarian effort, and I'll get to that in a second with Elon Musk and some of the people, you know, connected to this, is that there's a loss of a sense of what they're building, and they've got to keep the pressure up. Trump's focus, the focus of the big, beautiful bill was not that it was going to be perfect. There's no way you ever pass a perfect bill, let alone within this current state of our Congress. But the point was for Trump to implement core aspects of what's needed, what companies are telling him, what banks are telling him. How do we get you to spend? We've got $7 trillion today, $7 trillion sloshing around in what are called money market accounts, or accounts that are very liquid, where you can get money out of them quickly. 7 trillion a day. That's the bailout money. That's all of the bailout money has moved into these easy money accounts. Why? Because banks aren't lending. They're not lending to any industry. They're not lending to productive purposes. It's all just kind of a speculative game. It's probably there to some extent to make sure they can keep propping up that stock market bubble. And Trump's saying, look, we've got to get you guys investing. And they'll tell him, and some of what is just accurate, the regulations, the environmental standards, the inability for any of these projects to be built on time, under budget, and to be ultimately productive and profitable in the end is so low, we'd rather just keep our money in these money market accounts. Partly what Jerome Powell is doing by keeping the interest rates up, because that means those money market accounts are giving 4, 5, 6%. So Trump's got to move this money. He's got to get people being productive. In this bill are key elements, both the tax breaks for working class, the tips, the overtime, the Social Security. But a big part of this is capital write-offs for construction, for equipment. We need construction. Construction wasn't able to be written off as a capital expense. You could do equipment, you couldn't do construction. Why is this such a big deal today? All of our factories have been gutted for 30 years. I mean, not all of them, but you know what I mean. So much of our manufacturing infrastructure, including just the manufacturing plants, are so dilapidated because our energy grid is so broken down. We've got to construct power plants along with a manufacturing facility all at the same time. You've got to strip the regulations. You've got to make this much quicker, much more efficient. And you've got to create this environment, like with tariffs, that there's going to be a growing internal U.S. demand, not just consumer demand, but also an industrial demand. So you're building the steel plants, the aluminum plants, the plants for equipment, for ball bearings, for electronics, for microprocessors. You know, you've got to create this massive growing demand. And you also create a demand for labor, for construction, for skilled trades, and the whole process. Trump is thinking about building the country. That's what he's thinking. He's like, I was president of a company that built real estate. Now I'm president. I'm in charge of a nation to build the country. And far too few people think that way. I mean, there's it's hard to find any other political leader that has identified over the last 30, 40 years, that has identified that their role in leading the country is to build the country, to build its culture, to build its infrastructure, to build its scientific facilities, to build its exploration capabilities, to build stronger families, to build cities. I mean, there's a constructive element, a vision of effort that you're rallying people around to do. As John Kennedy said, don't ask what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. But the country has to say there's a mission. Kennedy was inspired by what he saw with the water projects in the West. He said, wow, we have so much water in the East, we don't know what to do with it. You guys don't have enough. You're building some of the most monumental infrastructure for water collection and distribution the world has ever seen. And Kennedy got a sense of this. I don't think he even had it prior to being president, but he had a commitment to building the country. However, he saw it, but he had a sense that that's what we needed to do, not get caught up in a forever land war in Vietnam. Right? If you have a sense of building the country, then you don't get sucked into, you don't get manipulated by lies. You wait, you see. Okay, so you say Iraq's got weapons of mass destruction. Let's see. You have the ability to have some long vision. Now, obviously last week had a lot of the Iran situation and a lot of tension regarding that. Trump is meeting with Netanyahu tonight. Tucker interviewed the president of Iran. I'm not really going to touch a lot of those aspects tonight. One aspect that may be worth referencing, though, in this context is the discussion with Vladimir Putin that Trump had on Friday. In that discussion, which Trump said he was kind of disappointed by, he's disappointed because what Putin told him is that we're going to keep fighting this until Ukraine gives us what we want. And that's just the reality. And I'm not even taking a side on it. It's just how the Russians and Putin thinks. We've got the upper hand. You guys are tired of draining your own resources and treasure on this. You don't even have enough weapons to provide them any longer. You're running out, your stockpiles are running short. You're concerned about China. You're concerned about other countries. But in that discussion, what Putin wanted to communicate to Trump was something that's at the core of what we've been discussing here, and core to the idea of rebuilding the United States. That if we're going to rebuild the United States, we have to have a stable world. And a stable world requires the United States to have clear partnerships with other countries that can help ensure a stable world. So the immediate question that would come up if you have that hypothesis, because that's what should shape foreign policy. You want a stable world to have access to the resources we need. Trump is bringing 5 leaders from West Africa. He had a major peace deal with the Congo and Rwanda. He's doing these questions because the United States would like access to some of these resources, and these nations would like access to American investments in American business and the development of their own countries and partnerships with the United States in terms of trade. It makes sense. The Chinese have been doing some of this for Africa now for a decade or more. A constructive approach. And in some cases, some of the Africans want some competition with the Chinese. And the United States now under Trump is bringing that. We're not bringing support of Islamic terror or military engagements. We're actually going to bring a constructive economic approach. But immediately the question would come up, why are we working or partnering with the United Kingdom? Why are they our leading partner in foreign policy? What constructive elements and stability does the United Kingdom bring to the world? They have very little military or economic power. They have a huge level of kind of financial control with London, but their nation as a whole is falling to pieces. The government there is already collapsing after a year, and the level of demographic crisis is almost unspeakable in terms of what they've done. It's been known for decades that the crown, Charles, and the deep state of England was building nothing less than a Londonistan. You were basically importing the terrorist networks from all over Southwest Asia, from Afghanistan and Pakistan all the way into the Gulf and the Mediterranean, importing that in North Africa into London. And they've literally done that now for decades, and it's created an incredible problem. That's our leading foreign policy partner. Can anyone think of anything more insane and psychotic and destructive? The same people, the same nation that literally ran the coup against President Trump, the same country that literally ran the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq hoax via Tony Blair and the British government. And we can go on and on. Woodrow Wilson's construction of the Federal Reserve and the direct relationship Wilson had to a parliamentary government and the rule of Britain as the leading global power, which sucked us into World War I. I mean, there has been no point when that has been a positive and healthy relationship, with total love and admiration for the English people. But the British government, under their crown, is insane. So if we start from just an honest sense, we need a constructive and stable environment in the world. We need good partners to be able to build a viable consumption of our own country. You wouldn't say, well, on the top of the list, just starting from scratch, well, let's make sure we work with the United Kingdom. That's got to be number one. No American would probably say that. It would be actually an interesting poll to poll Americans and say, if starting from scratch we had to build a new foreign policy, what would be the top 3 countries or top country, number 1, that we should partner with? Well, what Vladimir Putin told Trump on Friday was that if you're thinking this thing through, President Trump, you might want to consider the role that the United States and Russia have had, because he called, of course, and talked to Trump on the 4th of July, and he was calling to congratulate us on our 249th, and we're beginning our 250th birthday. It's a big deal. This is exciting. And he said, you know, Russia was there with the United States in your revolution. We actually formed the League of Armed Neutrality and actually helped to make sure that there wasn't increasing levels of attack or support against you during that Revolutionary War. They also then supported the Union in the Civil War. This is what Putin is telling Trump. We were allies in World War I, though the United States should have taken a different role. We were definitely not enemies. We should have brokered a peace deal is what we should have done. And then, of course, we all know we were actually allies in World War II. So the only time of contention has been when Russia was taken over by this communist ideology and communist regime. And even then, we were close allies in World War II under that. It was only the post-World War II era where Britain became our leading ally. It's the British today which are the ones fomenting a conflict with Russia. They're the ones telling Ukraine, we'll start building drones with you. We'll set up terrorist operations. The Russians have literally named the British multiple times as the ones directly responsible for the most aggressive terrorist attacks on Russia during the war. I say terrorist attacks because they're attacks far outside the line of conflict, but whatever, they're just military attacks. It's largely been the UK the entire time. And so now the one thing that Putin and Trump share, so that's an interesting dynamic. And the thing that both presidents share is that, and this is the outlook I would say for many Russians, that the Russians they saw the problems of communism. But the Russians also saw that which came after communism, this neoliberal monster from the West, this kind of neoliberal order, was far more satanic, far more godless, far more destructive. At least under communism, there was a regard for Russia and the Russian Empire. Under the neoliberal structure, there was no regard for anything. Communism had its clear ideological problems and economic insanities, but it had regard at least for Russia. The neoliberal structure nearly destroyed it. That's the same thing many of us are realizing and have come to terms with that we're facing in the West, that this Democratic Party, 2/3 of which has no pride in the United States, has adopted an outlook that is far more radical than communists. Mamdani, or I would call him Bomdani, is not a communist. Some say he's a communist Islamist. some people want to just give him a social democrat. He's far not a social democrat. He is expressive of a radical left neoliberal agenda. It's far worse. There's no intent on building or constructing anything. There's no sense of patriotic pride. There's no sense of the historical sacrifices that people have made for the country. And that's increasingly what the Democratic Party is turning into. Trump's intention, and I think our intention here on this call, as we get into now clearly a critical period for the midterm elections, these things kind of start now, just because of the nature of American politics these days. That third of the Democratic Party that takes pride in the country, many of whom are going to be working class people. They're not going to be the affluent, wealthy on the coasts. They're not going to be, super ideological into the green agenda, abortion, sexual issues. They're going to be working class people, many of whom are on Medicaid, many of whom who need some government services. And they have never even considered voting for a Republican Party that they believe is going to kind of injure their quality of life. But they love the country. They want to contribute to the nation. And that's a third of the Democratic Party's voters. Based on this, just to say that the poll is somehow totally accurate, which no poll is. But that there's clearly an indication of a potential there to bring this into the process. So I say all of this to, one, maybe provide us some context for the discussion tonight, but to get at this kind of rupture, over, is Israel-Iran, and are we controlled by the Israelis? Are we controlled by AIPAC? Are we controlled now by the neocons? That many people kind of had these kind of panic, what Trump once called the panicans. There was kind of a panican movement of people that started to freak out and panic that Trump was now somehow, finally, he's been co-opted. After like 10 years of this guy putting his life on the line, he's now somehow been co-opted by Netanyahu and the Israelis. But we saw that Trump recognized a pathway out. And it's not clear what happened. And I don't know if it's really reason to speculate, but how much we told the Iranians. Clearly, the Iranians told us what they were going to do. How much of this was just, we need to get this conflict ended. Let's find a way to end it with maybe some fireworks involved and move on back into negotiations. Trump's envoy, Witkoff, will be in Oslo this week meeting with Araghchi, the foreign minister of Iran. He'll also then be in Doha later this week, meeting with the Israelis and Hamas. And the Wall Street Journal just reported that you have networks now in the West Bank, leadership on the city level, sheiks, so a traditional tribal leadership in these ancient cities of Hebron and in Bethlehem and the other cities kind of north and south of Jerusalem in the West Bank, that are acknowledging that the Palestinian Authority, the Hamas, these entities are not the true representatives of the Palestinian people. And the Wall Street Journal was reporting, they're calling upon President Trump to come in and broker a new deal where they can build up these cities. They called it the Emirates, kind of like the Palestinian Emirates, where they would build up these cities. I'm not promoting that as a solution. I haven't done enough. Don't know enough about it to even really evaluate it. But what you see coming out of the woodwork, that this is an expression of new ideas, of a different approach, and of recognizing that these stale, old, so-called representative, these leadership of the Palestinian Authority of Mahmoud Abbas and Fatah, or the Hamas groupings, these things are not really the legitimate representatives and leadership to make these grand decisions. They're somewhat leadership that are rooted in the state of conflict. Hamas was funded by Netanyahu. These things exist as a state of conflict, not as a state of construction. And Trump's entire approach to this entire region has been build, construct, he threw out the idea of turning Gaza into a massively new construction zone. But there are different ideas. One of the ideas is to get rid of the Hamas leadership and bring in the UAE, bring in Qatar, bring in these other governments and have them provide some type of government leadership, but something fundamentally different. To do what? To build, to construct. And this is something our founder, Lyndon LaRouche, often referenced. Even what was it called? The Oslo Accords from '93, Arafat and Rabin, when the Palestinians acknowledged Israel's existence and there was a potential for peace. But the emphasis was you've got to get shovels in the ground. Otherwise, the conflict continues, the leadership gets stratified into these conflict arrangements, and the process never ends. And that's what's happened. The current dynamic, the current call for just a two-state solution and no real recognition of Israel, these things don't hold. You've got to come up with something different. But the fundamental question is construction and building. And that's why the panicans on how Trump is handling foreign policy, you see that they lack a certain foundation and footing of where we're trying to go. You can't just be against bad things. Good intentions lead to hell, because simply being against hell will ultimately take you there. You have to have a positive vision of where you're going. It can't just be good intentions. And this is the problem with Musk and the kind of idea of an America party. But it's not just Musk, it's this crowd, this political crowd. I mean, Musk is a remarkable builder and inventor. And he's a great national resource for solving some of our big problems, like the rocket questions and space exploration, or Starlink. I mean, he's done some remarkable things. We want to keep him active and involved in that way. But he's captivated by an idea that there are quick and easy solutions, which is an obsession with Silicon Valley, with all the companies that have come out of it. We're going to make things more efficient. We're going to get rid of the brick and mortar. We're going to solve quick and easy problems. You don't address a nation's problems that have built up and festered for 50 years. We are in the middle of a huge political revolution that is overthrowing a regime that came to power really with the assassination of John Kennedy. It was obviously already underway under Woodrow Wilson and going back to the assassination of William McKinley in 1901. But by the time that you get into the early 70s and the coup of Richard Nixon, you have in place a fundamentally new regime. It's anti-presidential authority. It's based on bureaucracy and kind of the deep state control, which is what getting rid of Nixon was ultimately meant to do. And so for over 50 years, we've had a regime that is interested in the total destruction of the United States. And that's why the total destruction of our country has occurred. What Trump has unleashed is a revolution to overthrow the regime governing our country. It is regime change America. It's a revolution America. It's a fundamental change in our orientation. To then take that revolution and say, you've got to balance the budget. You've got to cut the deficit completely. Well, wait a minute. If you were to start with all of the things we have to do to rebuild our country, to rebuild our nation, and more importantly, to rebuild a new regime, a regime that's going to have the consent of the governed. We are fundamentally premised in our Declaration of Independence on the consent of the governed. An idea that comes out of, the golden age of Europe in the 15th century. This new concept that you can govern only truly under God's grace or God's kind of blessing or what would be the word? Anointing, kind of be anointed by God, is really to have the consent of the governed. We're based on that as a country. If you're going to do that, it means you have to build a political coalition that has the ability to maintain stability for decades. That's the coalition Washington built. That's the coalition Abraham Lincoln built. That was the coalition Franklin Roosevelt built. I mean, we have been a kind of a left-leaning, I mean, well, it's not even left-leaning, it became left-leaning. But what Franklin Roosevelt pulled together was a regime that lasted for a very long time. It took the assassination of Kennedy. It took the impeachment of Richard Nixon to really kill it off. And kind of a distraction of a lot of Americans, all of which those things happened were practically in the midst of a building war in Vietnam. And then you had the coup and attacks with 9/11 and the forever wars. But in this environment, we're shifting that. We're creating a new regime. We've got to build a coalition to have a functioning and viable government for the next 50 years. That's how long these regimes can last. Lincoln's lasted until really the assassination of McKinley, but even the legacy lasted even longer. That's the most important thing. How do we do that? By stealing the votes from the Democrats, by stealing their voters, by bringing the people that have pride in the country, who try to run their businesses or raise their families and get by, who don't obsess over government debt or government deficit. They're concerned about, why are their wages going down? Why are prices going up? Why is the public schools becoming crap? Why does healthcare seem psychotic? Who want things to function. They want physical effectiveness in the institutions they count on. They want to see a country building. They want to have a sense that their sacrifices are going to mean something because we're building something better. We're not just kind of making the accounting right. Everybody knows about accounting tricks. We've all seen accounting tricks in wherever you've worked. The last thing we need is an accounting trick on balancing a budget or a fixation over that, which just leads to then the accounting tricks. Because that's what stockholders want to see, is they want to see the good numbers. So just figure out how to make the numbers look good inside the company. Who cares about what else what the company should actually be doing? Just get the numbers to look good for the stockholders, and so that we can do a stock buyback with the dividends and profits and so on. I mean, it's madness. It's how we've run our businesses and economy, and they into the ground, and they continue to want to run the government the same way. It's madness. What makes sense is to build the country. So this is the Milton Friedman, this is the Austrian school, this is the libertarian outlook, this is the Tea Party obsession. None of those worked. Trump didn't run on that agenda. And he certainly didn't run on H-1B visas or electric vehicles or wind and solar and these kinds of things. So, I don't think Musk's thing is going to go anywhere, but it's not about just thinking Musk and a third party would be insane. It would be destructive. It would hand more power to the Democrats. What we've got to recognize is that what this Republican Party is becoming, but it depends upon what we do, is the party that is going to build the nation, that is going to construct and begin to take the steps to make our country work, to make it effective, to make it meet the needs of the American people where they are right now, and begin to empower them, and especially empower the younger generations to start building a vibrant and viable country long-term. Because that's what Hamilton and Washington did. That's what Lincoln did. That's what Franklin Roosevelt did. And that's what we have to do again today. And we're going to need critical international partners that can support that initiative. These people who scream about the immigration question, because Trump just got $150 billion, we are going to implement the largest mass deportation effort in the country's history. Something like 30 million, 40 million illegals here at this point. I mean, that may be the high-end possible number, but it is a viable number. You think, well, if we run our country, we run the United States on cheap labor. And some people, but you have to have it. And I'm not even sure you have to have it for farms and hospitals, though. If somebody's been working at a farm for 20, 25 years, that's a pretty personal business. I have a hard time thinking that person. But some things have to be worked out. Trump has said that, and that makes sense. But if we're going to run our country on, we need cheap labor. We can't pay roofers $40 or $50 an hour. Or sure you can. It just costs more to do roofing. But that means a 20-year-old out of high school can probably make a decent buck and figure out what he wants to do with his life. What is Mexico supposed to do? What is Bolivia supposed to do, or Honduras, or Nicaragua, or any other country? If the United States' model is to use cheap labor from those countries to maintain its so-called great economy, if that's the model that we're saying this is the model to have the most effective country in the world, well, how is that an example for other countries? How are they supposed to think of building their country up? So where do they get cheap labor? I mean, Mexico's already got like Mexico's got approximately 30 million people living on less than $5 a day. So, and they've already, I mean, are they supposed to bring in more poor people? It doesn't have any viability. It's not a model. It's a model it's a model of the race to the bottom. And that's what's been happening. What we're discussing doing is to demonstrate to the world and to other major nations how a nation does viably develop. That is our eternal mission. That is what our founders knew they were founding. We're going to found a nation that's going to be fundamentally different, not just on the principles we hold. We don't have a king and so on. We don't have some hereditary class that governs us. But we're going to actually demonstrate how you can rapidly marshal the resources of your people and their talents and your financing and your banking and credit. And we're going to rapidly build and develop a country. We've done it 3 times. We're going to do it a 4th time today. That's the vision that's going to recruit. That's the vision Trump is unleashing. This is the new Republican Party, but this is the new regime in the United States. And any party that is going to come into existence has to be consistent with that vision. There can be disagreements, but not disagreements on that we are building and demonstrating a viable system for any nation to replicate of how they might want to build their nation. Because that is the United States. That is why our independence was an earthquake in human history. The greatest political moment in human history is because of that was what we were demonstrating, and we've done it consistently, and that's what we have to do today. So hopefully you guys had a great weekend. Hopefully this was a discussion that provoked some thoughts and ideas. I'll leave my comments there, and I'm sure many of you have some thoughts and ideas and questions. So Keisha, why don't we see what people are thinking, and if you want to jump back in here, we can see what you're thinking.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's much needed in terms of elevating the discussion, especially going into the 2026 elections and what's going to be needed from those running for office to carry out and fulfill President Trump's agenda, his Agenda 47, his vision for the country. And I know a lot of what you've just been talking about requires some focus on the labor force. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit in addition to further developments of the economic vision and how we carry this out with Brian on Saturday. Brian Lance is going to be giving the presentation on Saturday. And just in terms of the labor force and, how you're going to train people up. I mean, this was one of President Trump's bills or his executive orders, a major executive order that was signed, I think, on April 23rd, which talks about the training needed for your skilled laborers, apprenticeship programs. And you think about, we're talking about how the United States has to be a leader in energy production. We're discussing President Trump has major initiatives to put forth development of more nuclear power plants on top of other energy resources, but some of the biggest aspects of the nuclear power plants and what they have to offer in terms of a rapid increase in energy production. Well, these power plants aren't going to build themselves. what's needed is not just going to be 4-year college degrees in nuclear energy and nuclear sciences, but you're going to have trained skilled workers, apprenticeship programs. You're going to have electricians, welders. Um, you're going to have all kinds of skilled labor that's going to build up these plants, just as an example. And as a part of what he did or called for in this executive order in terms of training the workforce, he called for direct orders to secretaries of labor, education, and commerce to view all federal workforce programs to modernize, integrate, and align programs to address critical workforce needs. And it goes on to discuss what type of training, apprenticeship programs people will need to go into these areas, as well as supporting development of up to 1 million apprenticeships per year. So that's extremely important, and I think it can't be overlooked in terms of what we've done with just the insanity of our education system, the cutting back on these types of trade programs, apprenticeship, pushing people into these 4-year college, and especially around the liberal arts and the the programs that have sent back the productivity of our nation. So I just wanted to bring that in because I think that's going to be an extremely vital aspect to what it's going to take to rebuild productivity of our economy. And this is not a snap your finger happen overnight. It's going to take, but I also think that it's something that it's not going to take decades and decades to build.
Yeah, it can't. Yeah, you're right. Let me jump back in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can't take decades. I mean, I think we're going to feature this in one of our shows this week on our YouTube channel. But Jim Farley is the head of Ford, and he gave a really kind of remarkable presentation in Aspen, where a lot of the globalists meet. But he kind of gave a certain sense of like, look, Ford's history is to commit to the American worker. He pointed out that both Chrysler and GM went bankrupt in 2008. Ford didn't. They ended up becoming the largest employer of the UAW. They're going to hold a huge conference right here in Detroit this fall at the old Michigan Central Station, which has just been remodeled by Ford, because it was the kind of paradigmatic, it was the epitome of the collapse of Detroit. It's this huge, large office building that was also the Detroit Central Station Railroad, and it had just fallen into complete disrepair. So they remodeled it and rebuilt it, and they're going to hold a major conference there specifically on training a new workforce. And again, he talks about the kind of construction, the kind of HVAC, the kind of skilled trades. And the question today is that skilled trades, and Trump's own Commerce Secretary Howard Schultz has talked about this, or Howard Lutnick, has talked about this. We're talking skilled trades that you're making $150,000 a year. That's the kind of income you need to support a family of 5. We can get there. We can get there rapidly. And if you start offering that kind of income, maybe starting at 100,000, but quickly by the time you're 8 years experience, you're pulling in 150. You're going to get a lot more people who say that makes a lot more sense. I mean, you can still do that for 5 or 10 years, and then you can go to college if you want to do something in science, or you want to become a professor or school teacher or something. But the idea that you can go and learn a skilled trade, you're going to have that the rest of your life. And that's how the United States used to function. And I think we've got to get back to that kind of commitment, and to see that from the CEO of Ford, who also even praised Trump's tariffs, even if he kind of squirmed about them a little bit. But he recognized this is what we need to do. And the only way it's going to work is if presidents of major companies will also then commit to the well-being of our nation and of our people. And that's true. Henry Ford did it. George Westinghouse did it. This is a fundamental commitment. the people that are leading your companies, your major industrial companies, have to have an interest in the well-being and capabilities of the citizens. Henry Kaiser did this on the West Coast. It's just part of how the country actually works. And within 6 months of Trump's second term, we can see this kind of revival of the American spirit, and it's just awesome. So people should tune in on Saturday night for Brian's class, and certainly if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, where we're doing these 3 videos a week, certainly do so and share them with friends.
Yes, absolutely. And before I open it up, just on that, I should have made this point earlier, but I do want to thank all of you who have made possible what we're doing in terms of videos, the productions by Barbara Board and her updates, and Susan Kokinda, and by becoming subscribers to Promethean Action. We actually have pretty much reached our goal of 1,000 paid subscribers. I think we might have been like 5 short. And if you haven't already become a paid subscriber at any level, starting at $10, then we would really encourage you to do that. And
if you can help us get to the next round of 2,000.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not stopping there. So, but that helped us get over to that goal. And now we're going to continue moving forward, especially as we start to build up for the 2026 elections. And we'll be talking more on that and how we're going to be participating in that process as the days and weeks ahead come. So with that, let me just look at what we have here. I had some hands still up earlier.
Yeah, we got some hands up. Let's see what they got.
See what you guys have to say.